Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Second Vatican Council. The Second Vatican Council, fully the Second Ecumenical Council of the Vatican, and informally known as, addressed relations between the Catholic Church and the modern world. It was the 21st and most recent Ecumenical Council of the Catholic Church, and the second to be held at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. The Council, through the Holy See, formally opened under the pontificate of Pope John XXIII on the 11th of October 1962, and closed under Pope Paul VI on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception on the 8th of December 1965. Several changes resulted from the Council, including the renewal of consecrated life, with a revised charism, ecumenical efforts towards dialogue with other religions, and the universal call to holiness, which according to Pope Paul VI was the most characteristic and ultimate purpose of the teachings of the Council. According to Pope Benedict XVI, the most important and essential message of the Council is the Paschal Mystery as the center of what it is to be Christian, and therefore of the Christian life, the Christian year, the Christian seasons. Other changes which followed the Council included the widespread use of vernacular languages in the Mass instead of Latin, the subtle disuse of ornate clerical regalia, the revision of Eucharistic prayers, the abbreviation of the liturgical calendar, the ability to celebrate the Mass versus populum as well as ad orientem, and modern aesthetic changes encompassing contemporary Catholic liturgical music and artwork. Many of these changes remain divisive among the Catholic faithful. Of those who took part in the Council's opening session, 4 have become popes: Giovanni Battista Cardinal Montini, who on succeeding John XXIII took the name Pope Paul VI; Bishop Albino Luciani, the future John Paul I; Bishop Karol Wojtyla, who became John Paul II; and Joseph Ratzinger, present as a theological consultant, who became Benedict XVI. In the 1950s, theological and biblical studies in the Catholic Church had begun to sway away from the neo-scholasticism and biblical literalism, which a reaction to Catholic modernism had enforced. Since the First Vatican Council, this shift could be seen in theologians such as Karl Rahner, Michael Herbert and John Courtney Murray, who looked to integrate modern human experience with church principles based on Jesus Christ, as well as others such as Yves Congar, Joseph Ratzinger and Henry de Lubac, who looked to an accurate understanding of Scripture and the early Church Fathers as a source of renewal. At the same time, the world's bishops faced challenges driven by political, social, economic, and technological change. Some of these bishops sought new ways of addressing those challenges. The First Vatican Council had been held nearly a century before, but had been cut short when the Italian army entered the city of Rome at the end of Italian unification. As a result, only deliberations on the role of the papacy and the congruent relationship of faith and reason were completed, with examination of pastoral issues concerning the direction of the Church left unaddressed. Pope John XXIII, however, gave notice of his intention to convene the Council on 25 January 1959, less than 3 months after his election in October 1958. This sudden announcement, which caught the Curia by surprise, caused little initial official comment from church insiders. Reaction to the announcement was widespread and largely positive from both religious and secular leaders outside the Catholic Church, and the Council was formally summoned by the Apostolic Constitution Humani Salutis on 25 December 1961. In various discussions before the Council convened, John XXIII said that it was time to open the windows of the Church and let in some fresh air. He invited other Christians outside the Catholic Church to send observers to the Council. Acceptances came from both the Eastern Orthodox Church and Protestant denominations as internal observers. But these observers did not cast votes in the approbation of the conciliar documents. Preparation. Pope John XXIII's announcement on 25 January 1959 of his intention to call a general council came as a surprise even to the cardinals present. The pontiff pre-announced the council under a full moon when the faithful, with their candle lights, gathered in St. Peter's Square, and jokingly noted about the brightness of the moon. He had tested the idea only 10 days before, with one of them his Cardinal Secretary of State Domenico Tardini, who gave enthusiastic support to the idea, although the Pope later said the idea came to him in a flash in his conversation with Tardini. 2 cardinals had earlier attempted to interest him in the idea. They were 2 of the most conservative, Ernesto Ruffini and Alfredo Ottaviani, who had already in 1948 proposed the idea to Pope Pius XII, and who put it before John XXIII on 27 October 1958. Actual preparations for the council took more than 2 years and included work from 10 specialized commissions, people for mass media and Christian unity, and a central commission for overall coordination. These groups, composed mostly of members of the Roman Curia, produced 987 proposed constituting sessions, making it the largest gathering in any council in church history. Attendance varied in later sessions from 2,100 to over 2,300. In addition, a varying number of periti were available for theological consultation, a group that turned out to have a major influence as the council went forward. 17 Orthodox churches and Protestant denominations sent observers. More than 36 representatives of other Christian communities were present at the opening session, and the number grew to nearly 100 by the end of the Fourth Council sessions. Opening. Pope John XXIII opened the council on the 11th of October 1962 in a public session, and read the Declaration Gaudae Mater Ecclesia before the council fathers. What is needed at the present time is a new enthusiasm, a new joy, and serenity of mind in the unreserved acceptance by all of the entire Christian faith, without forfeiting that accuracy and precision in its presentation which characterized the proceedings of the Council of Trent and the First Vatican Council. What is needed, and what everyone imbued with a truly Christian, Catholic and Apostolic spirit craves today, is that this doctrine shall be more widely known, more deeply understood, and more penetrating in its effects on men's moral lives. What is needed is that this certain and immutable doctrine, to which the faithful owe obedience, be studied afresh and reformulated in contemporary terms. For this deposit of faith, or truths which are contained in our time-honored teaching, is one thing. The manner in which these truths are set forth is something else. The 13th of October 1962 marked the initial working session of the Council. That day's agenda included the election for members of the 10 conciliar commissions. Each would have 16 elected and 8 appointed members, and were expected to do most of the work of the Council. It had been expected that the members of the preparatory commissions, where the Curia was heavily represented, would be confirmed as the majorities on the conciliar commissions. Senior French Cardinal Achille Liénart addressed the council, saying that the bishops could not intelligently vote for strangers. He asked that the vote be postponed to give all the bishops a chance to draw up their own lists. German Cardinal Joseph Frings seconded that proposal, and the vote was postponed. The first meeting of the council adjourned after only 15 minutes. Commissions. The bishops met to discuss the membership of the commissions along with other issues, both in national and regional groups, as well as in gatherings that were more informal. The schemata from the preparatory sessions were thrown out and new ones were created. When the council met on 16 October 1962, a new slate of commission members was presented and approved by the council. One important change was a significant increase in membership from Central and Northern Europe instead of countries such as Spain or Italy. More than 100 bishops from Africa, Asia and Latin America were Dutch or Belgian and tended to associate with the bishops from those countries. These groups were led by Cardinals Bernardus Johannes Alfrink of the Netherlands and Leo Swaenens of Belgium. Issues. After adjournment on 8 December, work began on preparations for the sessions scheduled for 1963. These preparations, however, were halted upon the death of Pope John XXIII on 3 June 1963. Since an ecumenical council is automatically interrupted and suspended upon the death of the Pope who convened it until the next Pope orders the council to be continued or dissolved. Pope Paul VI was elected on 21 June 1963 and immediately announced that the council would continue. Second period, 1963. In the months prior to the second period, Pope Paul VI worked to correct some of the problems of organization and procedure that had been discovered during the first period. This included inviting additional lay Catholic and non-Catholic observers, reducing the number of proposed schemata to 17, and later eliminating the requirement of secrecy surrounding general sessions. Pope Paul's opening address on 29 September 1963 stressed the pastoral nature of the council and set out 4 purposes for it. During this period, the bishops approved the constitution on the liturgy Sacrosanctum Concilium and the decree on social communication Inter Mirifica. Work went forward with the schemata on the church bishops and dioceses and ecumenism. On 8 November 1963, Joseph Frings criticized the Holy Office and drew an articulate and impassioned defense by its secretary Alfredo Ottaviani. This exchange is often considered the most dramatic of the council. The second period ended on 4 December. Third period, 1964. In the time between the second and third periods, the proposed schemata were further revised on the basis of comments from the Council Fathers. A number of topics were reduced to statements of fundamental propositions that could gain approval during the third period, with post-conciliar commissions handling implementation of these measures. At the end of the second period, Cardinal Leo Joseph Swaenens of Belgium had asked the other bishops, "Why are we even discussing the reality of the Church, when half of the Church is not even represented here?" referring to women. In response, 15 women were appointed as auditors in September 1964. Eventually 23 women were auditors at the Second Vatican Council, including 10 women religious. The auditors had no official role in the deliberations, although they attended the meetings of subcommittees working on council documents, particularly texts that dealt with the laity. They also met together on a weekly basis to read draft documents and comment on them. During the third period, which began on 14 September 1964, the Council Fathers worked through a large volume of proposals. Schemata on ecumenism, the official view on Protestant and Eastern Orthodox separated brethren, the Eastern Rite churches, and the dogmatic constitution of the Church were approved and promulgated by the Pope. Schemata on the life and ministry of priests and the missionary activity of the Church were rejected and sent back to commissions for complete rewriting. Work continued on the remaining schemata, in particular those on the Church in the modern world and religious freedom. There was controversy over revisions of the decree on religious freedom and the failure to vote on it during the third period, but Pope Paul promised that this schema would be the first to be reviewed in the next period. Pope Paul closed the third period on the 21st of November by announcing a change in the Eucharistic fast and formally reaffirming Mary as Mother of the Church. Fourth period, 1965. 11 schemata remained unfinished at the end of the third period and commissions worked to give them their final form. Schema 13 on the Church in the Modern World was revised by a commission that worked with the assistance of laymen. Pope Paul VI opened the last period of the Council on 14 September 1965 with the establishment of the Synod of Bishops. This more permanent structure was intended to preserve close cooperation of the bishops with the Pope after the Council. The first business of the fourth period was the consideration of the Decree on Religious Freedom, Dignitatis Humani, one of the more controversial of the conciliar documents. The vote was 1,997 for to 224 against, a margin that widened even further by the time the bishops finally signed the decree. The principal work of the other part of the period was work on 3 documents, all of which were approved by the Council Fathers. The lengthened and revised Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, was followed by decrees on missionary activity, Adjents, and the ministry and life of priests, Presbyterorum Ordinis. The Council also gave final approval to other documents that had been considered in earlier sessions. They included the Dogmatic Constitution on Divine Revelation, decrees on the Pastoral Office of Bishops, the life of persons in religious orders, education for the priesthood, Christian education, and the role of the laity. One of the more controversial documents was Nostra Aetate, which stated that the Jews of the time of Christ, taken indiscriminately, and all Jews today, are no more responsible for the death of Christ than Christians. A major event of the final days of the Council was the act of Pope Paul, an Orthodox Patriarch Athenagoras, of a joint expression of regret for many of the past actions that had led up to the Great Schism between the Western and Eastern churches. The old story of the Samaritan has been the model of the spirituality of the Council. On the 8th of December the Council was formally closed, with the bishops professing their obedience to the Council's decrees. To help carry forward the work of the Council, Pope Paul. Liturgy. The first matter covered by the Council was the liturgy, to emphasize the primacy of God and the primacy of adoration. According to Pope Benedict XVI, he said that the most important essential idea of the Council itself is Paschal Mystery as the center of what it is to be Christian, and therefore of the Christian life, the Christian year, the Christian seasons expressed in Eastertide, and on Sunday, which is always the day of the resurrection. Thus the liturgy, especially the Eucharist, which makes the Paschal Mystery present, is the summit toward which the activity of the Church is directed. At the same time, it is the font from which all her power flows. The matter that had the most immediate effect on the lives of individual Catholics was the revision of the liturgy. The central idea was that there ought to be lay participation in the liturgy, which means they take part fully aware of what they are doing, actively engaged in the rite and enriched by its effects. In the mid-1960s, permissions were granted to celebrate most of the Mass in vernacular languages, including the canon from 1967 onwards. The amount of scripture read during Mass was greatly expanded through the introduction of multiple-year lectionaries. Neither the Second Vatican Council nor the subsequent revision of the Roman Missal abolished Latin as the liturgical language of the Roman Rite. The official text of the Roman Missal, on which translations into vernacular languages are to be based, continues to be in Latin, and it can still be used in the celebration. Ecclesiology. Perhaps the most famous and most influential product of the Council is the Dogmatic Constitution on the Church. Lumen Gentium, in its first chapter titled The Mystery of the Church, is the famous statement that the document immediately adds, nevertheless, many elements of sanctification and of truth are found outside its visible confines. The other characteristics of the period were described by Belgian Bishop Émile Joseph de Smedt as legalism and clericalism in what has been described as one of the most dramatic moments of Vatican II. According to Pope Paul VI, the most characteristic and ultimate purpose of the teachings of the Council is the universal call to holiness. John Paul II calls this an intrinsic and essential aspect of the Council Fathers' teaching on the Church. All the faithful of Christ of whatever rank or status are called to the fullness of the Christian life and to the perfection of charity. By this holiness as such a more human manner of living is promoted in this earthly society. Thus in his plan for the Millennium Novo Millennio in Inte, John Paul II said that all pastoral initiatives must be set in relation to holiness as the first priority of the Church. Scripture and divine revelation. The Council sought to revive the central role of Scripture in the theological and devotional life of the Church, building upon the work of earlier popes in crafting a modern approach to scriptural analysis and interpretation. A new approach to interpretation was approved by the bishops. The Church was to continue to provide versions of the Bible in the mother tongues of the faithful, and both clergy and laity were to continue to make Bible study a central part of their lives. This affirmed the importance of sacred scripture as attested by Providentissimus Deus, by Pope Leo XIII and the writings of the saints, doctors and popes throughout church history, but also approved historically conditioned interpretation of scripture as presented in Pius XII's 1943 encyclical Divino Afflanti Spiritu. Bishops. The role of the bishops was brought into renewed prominence, especially when seen collectively as a college that has succeeded to that of the apostles in teaching and governing the Church. This college was headed by the Pope. Objections to the Council. The questioning of the nature of and even validity of the Second Vatican Council continues to be a contending point of rejection and conflict among various religious communities, some of which are not in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. In particular, two schools of thought may be discerned. The most recent edition of 1983 Code of Canon Law states that Catholics may not disregard the teaching of an ecumenical council even if it does not propose such as definitive. Accordingly, it also maintains that present living Pope alone judges the criterion of membership for being in communio with the Church. The present canon law further articulates legacy. In addition to general spiritual guidance, the Second Vatican Council produced very specific recommendations, such as in the document Gaudium et Spes, any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities of extensive areas along with their population is a crime against God and man himself. It merits unequivocal and unhesitating condemnation. By the spirit of Vatican II is often meant promoting teachings and intentions attributed to the Second Vatican Council in ways not limited to literal readings of its documents spoken of as the letter of the Council. The spirit of Vatican II is invoked for a great variety of ideas and attitudes. Bishop John Tong Hon of Hong Kong used it with regard merely to an openness to dialogue with others, saying, "We are guided by the spirit of Vatican II, only dialogue and negotiation can solve conflicts." In contrast, Michael Novak described it as a spirit that such views of the Second Vatican Council were condemned by the Church's hierarchy and the works of theologians who were active in the Council. or who closely adhered to the Council's aspect of reform have often been criticized by the Church for espousing a belief system that the hierarchy considers radical and misguided. As Dave Urbam reads, therefore, following in the footsteps of the Council of Trent and of the First Vatican Council, this present Council wishes to set forth authentic doctrine on divine revelation and how it is handed on. Vatican II did not deny previous councils' correctness. To mark the 50th anniversary of the beginning of Vatican II in October 2011, Pope Benedict XVI declared the period from October 2012 to the Solemnity of Christ the King at the end of November 2013 a year of faith as. Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Would you like to know more?